On the 27th of December 2008, a security guard locked the doors of the last British Woolworths store for the final time. No announcement, no ceremony, no farewell speech from the boardroom. Just a man with a set of keys, an empty car park, and the quiet sound of a century ending. 807 stores, 30,000 jobs, 109 years of British high street history, gone in a single trading week. But the real story of Woolworths isn't about what died in December 2008. It's about what was betrayed long before that. A promise made to ordinary British families that lasted a century, then was quietly abandoned by the very people trusted to protect it. This is Albion's Attic. The Promise, 1909 to 1950. When the first British Woolworths opened on Church Street in Liverpool on the 5th of November 1909, it caused something close to a riot. People queued around the block, not because there was a sale, not because of advertising, because word had spread that inside that shop, nothing cost more than 6p. Not some things, everything. The concept crossed the Atlantic from America, where Frank Woolworth had built his fortune on a single revolutionary idea: remove the barrier between customer and goods, fix the price, trust the people. In Edwardian Britain, that was almost radical. Most shops still kept merchandise behind counters. Prices were negotiated. Working-class customers were made to feel their money wasn't quite welcome enough. Woolworths changed that overnight. You walked in, you picked things up, you examined them, you put them back if you didn't want them. Nobody followed you, nobody judged, nobody made you feel small for counting pennies. The 6p maximum didn't last forever. Prices rose as the decades passed, but the spirit remained. Woolworths was the shop that respected ordinary people. By the 1920s, there were over 200 stores across Britain. By the 1930s, over 300. They called the 3p and 6p counters the wonder counters. Children pressed their faces against them like museum exhibits. Mothers planned entire shopping trips around them. You could buy seeds for the garden, buttons for a blouse, a birthday card, a paper bag of sweets, a tin of shoe polish, and a replacement light bulb. All in one shop, all within walking distance, all without embarrassment. That was Woolworths, and for millions of British families in those early decades, it wasn't just a shop, it was a weekly ritual, a reliable comfort, part of the rhythm of British life. The golden years, 1950 to 1980. Ask anyone who grew up in Britain between 1950 and 1980 about Woolworths and watch their face change. The memory isn't complicated. It isn't nostalgic in a distant way. It's immediate, physical, specific. The smell hits first, that particular combination of warm plastic, pick-and-mix sugar, new records, and floor cleaner that existed nowhere else on earth. Then the sounds, the clatter of the pick-and-mix scoop, the faint music from the record counter, the squeak of shoes on linoleum floors worn smooth by decades of footfall. The pick-and-mix counter was the heart of it, the true soul of the store. You took a white paper bag. You chose your own: flying saucers, cola bottles, strawberry laces, foam shrimps, white mice, chocolate eclairs. Nobody rushed you. Nobody watched impatiently. You composed your selection with the seriousness of a general planning a campaign. Then the girl behind the counter weighed it, read the price without judgment, and handed it over. That moment, that specific moment of a child holding their own paper bag of chosen sweets. It sounds small. It wasn't. For many children, it was the first experience of genuine autonomy. You chose, you paid, it was yours. The record counter was where teenagers gathered. Long racks of 7-inch singles, albums in cardboard sleeves propped face out, chart hits from last week, budget compilations. You could stand there for 20 minutes handling records nobody pressured you to buy. Woolworths sold more singles than any other retailer in Britain through the 1960s and 1970s. The chart positions each week were partly determined by how many copies Woolworths ordered. That was the power of it, not just a shop, a cultural institution. The toy section before Christmas deserves its own chapter. 2 weeks before the 25th, those aisles became the most important places in Britain. Children walked them slowly, cataloguing wishes. Parents followed, calculating budgets. Grandparents arrived with lists written on folded paper. No other shop quite replicated that particular electricity, the sense that Christmas was real because Woolworths had the evidence right there under fluorescent lights. By 1970, Woolworths operated over 1,000 stores in Britain. The company employed more people than most British cities had residents, and the prices were still honest, still fair, still reachable by the family that had to think carefully about every pound. That was the promise, held for 60 years. Then the 70s arrived, and the cracks began. The slow unraveling, 1980 to 1997. Nobody woke up one morning and decided to destroy Woolworths. That's the important thing to understand. There was no single villain, no dramatic betrayal in a boardroom, just a slow series of reasonable-sounding decisions that added up to catastrophe. The first problem was identity. In the 1950s and 1960s, Woolworths knew exactly what it was, the affordable everything shop, the place ordinary families trusted. By the early 1980s, that certainty had faded. Marks & Spencer had moved up market. Supermarkets had expanded their non-food ranges. Specialist retailers had emerged for every category Woolworths had once owned. Records, HMV and Virgin did it better. Toys, Toys R Us arrived from America with warehouse spaces that dwarfed anything Woolworths could manage. Pick and mix, still popular, but not enough to anchor an entire business. Management responded in the worst way possible. They tried to be everything to everyone. New product categories were added constantly: electricals, clothing, home furnishings, garden equipment. The ranges multiplied while the floors stayed the same size. Walking into Woolworths in 1985 felt cluttered, confused, like a shop that couldn't decide what it was selling or to whom. The old customers felt it first. The women who had shopped there every week for 30 years began to drift away. Not dramatically, not angrily, just quietly, the way loyal customers leave when they feel a place had stopped caring.
They started at Marks & Spencer instead, or the new supermarket with the better car park, or the specialist shop that at least seemed confident about what it was doing. Woolworths management saw the declining footfall and responded with more changes, more categories, more ranges, more confused attempts to capture customers who had already left. The record business was sold in 1998 to create Entertainment UK. The entertainment division was eventually spun off entirely. That was the moment the soul left the building. Because for all its evolution over the decades, the record counter was the last thing in Woolworths that still carried the original electricity, the thing that made people browse instead of just buy. Without it, the shop was just a jumble of mid-price merchandise with no particular reason to exist. The boardroom hadn't noticed yet. The numbers still looked manageable, but the foundations were already hollow. The fatal decisions, 1997 to 2005. In 1982, Woolworths was demerged from its American parent company
and floated independently on the London Stock Exchange as Woolworths Holdings. It should have been a moment of freedom, a chance to refocus, to remember what British Woolworths actually was, and rebuild from that truth. Instead, it became a decade of distraction. The company acquired other businesses, music retail, home furnishings, supply chains that had nothing to do with the shop on the high street. The entertainment division became one of the largest music and DVD distributors in Britain, supplying not just Woolworths stores, but supermarkets and other retailers across the country, which meant Woolworths was now competing with its own customers. The logic seemed sound in spreadsheets: vertical integration, supply chain control, margin improvement. In reality, it was a company losing focus while telling itself it was gaining strength. The stores themselves were deteriorating. Shop fronts that had last been renovated in the 1970s looked tired. The lighting was flat, the fixtures were aging, the layout still reflected a retail philosophy from a different era. Competitors were investing in their environments. Woolworths was not. By 2001, the gap between walking into a Next or a newly refurbished Boots and walking into Woolworths had become uncomfortably visible. Customers noticed, the young ones especially. To a 16-year-old in 2001, Woolworths felt like somewhere their grandparents shopped, and grandparents don't create the cultural energy that keeps a retail brand alive. The company floated independently on the stock market in 2001 under the name Woolworths Group plc. The share price opened at 30 pence. Analysts were cautious. The business was described as a company in need of direction. That was the polite version. The honest version was that Woolworths was a 100-year-old institution being run by people who didn't understand what had made it matter. The final years, 2005 to 2008. Trevor Bysh-Jones became chief executive in 2002 and understood the crisis more clearly than most. He tried. He simplified the product range. He invested in shop refurbishments. He pushed the entertainment division hard, betting that music and DVD sales could anchor the business through the transition to a cleaner retail offer. For a time, the numbers steadied, not recovered, steadied. But 2004 brought something nobody in the Woolworths boardroom had properly prepared for: the Internet. Not in the dramatic way it eventually arrived, not yet, but quietly, with gathering speed. People began buying music online, first singles, then albums, downloads from iTunes at 79 pence per track. Woolworths had bet heavily on physical media, entire sections of floor space devoted to CDs and DVDs, purchasing commitments to suppliers based on projections that assumed physical media would remain dominant. Those projections were wrong. As download sales grew through 2005 and 2006, CD sales dropped with a speed that surprised even the pessimists. Woolworths found itself holding contracts to distribute physical media to a market that was choosing not to buy it. Entertainment UK, the distribution arm, began losing money, heavily. The stores tried to compensate by expanding other categories: more toys, more confectionery, more cheap electricals. But the identity problem that had been building since the 1980s now became acute. What was Woolworths? Nobody could answer clearly. Not the management, not the customers, not the analysts watching the share price slide. By 2007, the financial position had become serious. The debt load was heavy. The property portfolio was expensive. The leases on over 800 stores across Britain committed the company to rent payments that required strong sales to service. Sales were not strong. Christmas 2007 was the last one that looked like survival was possible. The results were disappointing, not catastrophic, but not nearly enough.
Into 2008, the credit markets froze following the global financial crisis. Woolworths needed refinancing, needed banks willing to extend credit to a struggling retailer in a deteriorating economy. The banks looked at the numbers and said no. Not brutally, not dramatically, just quietly, the way institutions decline when they've decided a case is closed. Without refinancing, the options narrowed to almost nothing. On the 26th of November 2008, Woolworths Group plc entered administration. The administrators, Deloitte, announced that all 807 stores would continue trading during the administration period while a buyer was sought. For 6 weeks, Woolworths continued to operate. The Christmas stock went on sale at increasingly heavy discounts. Staff came to work not knowing if they'd be paid. Customers came in for bargains, knowing they were witnessing something ending. It was the longest public farewell in British retail history, and nobody came to buy it. Not one serious bidder emerged for the whole business. Separate offers came for parts of it. The brand itself was sold, the website, the supply contracts, but the stores, the 807 shops that had stood on British high streets for a century, nobody wanted them. On the 27th of December 2008, the last stores closed. 30,000 people lost their jobs in the week between Christmas and New Year. The security guard turned the key, the lights went out, and Britain's high street lost something it would never recover.
What the empty shops left behind. Walk through any British town centre today and you'll find at least one Woolworths-shaped hole, not always visible, but always there. Some stores became Poundland, appropriate in a bleak way, the 6-penny maximum replaced by the pound maximum, the same customers, thinner margins, less soul. Others became betting shops, or pound bakeries, or charity shops, or simply stayed empty. The empty ones are the most honest, because what Woolworths occupied on a British high street wasn't just floor space, it was a role, a function, a reason for ordinary people to come into the town centre and spend an hour browsing without pressure. That role was never replaced. The 30,000 people who lost their jobs in that final week were mostly women, mostly part-time, mostly from the communities those stores served. They had worked there for years, decades in many cases. They knew the customers by name. They knew which children preferred flying saucers over cola bottles. They knew who came in every Thursday and what they usually bought. That knowledge didn't transfer to a balance sheet. It didn't appear in the administrator's report. But it was the actual substance of what Woolworths had been. Not the brand, not the supply contracts, not the distribution network. The woman behind the pick and mix counter who'd worked there for 23 years and knew your order before you'd finished choosing. That was Woolworths, and that was what was lost. People blamed the internet. People blamed the recession. People blamed poor management decisions. All of those things are true. All of them contributed. But the deeper truth is this. Woolworth died because the people running it in its final 2 decades forgot what it was for. Frank Woolworth had understood something profound in 1909, that ordinary people deserved a place that respected them, that fair prices and open access weren't charity, they were the foundation of loyalty. That loyalty lasted a century. It survived 2 world wars. It survived rationing and austerity. It survived the arrival of supermarkets and out-of-town retail parks and every other disruption the 20th century produced. It survived because the promise held. When the promise broke, When Woolworths stopped being certain about who it served and why, the loyalty evaporated. Not immediately, not noisily, quietly, gradually, inevitably. The Christmas television advertisements of the 1980s and 1990s still surface occasionally online. Children's faces, brightly wrapped toys, that familiar red logo. They produce a very specific feeling in anyone who grew up with them. Not just nostalgia, something sharper. The feeling of a thing that was genuinely good, that didn't have to end the way it did. That's the real grief of Woolworths. Not that it failed, everything eventually fails, but that it failed while forgetting what it had been, while chasing strategies and categories and margins and market positions, while the pick-and-mix counter still sat there in the corner, still drawing children, still producing that moment of a small hand holding a white paper bag, right up until the lights went out. The Woolworths brand still exists. It was sold during the administration and relaunched as an online retailer. You can visit the website today. It sells toys and children's clothing. The red logo is still there. The name is still there. But it's not Woolworths. Woolworths was the smell of warm plastic and pick-and-mix sugar on a Saturday morning. It was the weight of a white paper bag in a child's hand. It was the record you listened to 17 times, standing at a counter where nobody asked you to leave. It was the shop that treated ordinary people as if their money and their time and their presence mattered. That shop is gone. And no website with a familiar logo will ever bring it back. Tomorrow, we're visiting another piece of Britain that quietly disappeared, the British seaside holiday of the 1980s and everything we left behind on those shores. Thank you for your time in Albion's attic.